Good morning. Welcome to the BYU Real Estate Webinar Series. My name is Barrett Slade, Professor of Finance, the host of today's webinar. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to announce that on November 4th, Troy Carpenter will be hosting Danny Wall, Director of the Ivory Boyer Real Estate Center at the University of Utah. Danny and colleagues will be talking about the Wasatch Front housing market and its affordability challenges. We'll be sending out an invitation to that webinar in the coming days. Please note that after our guest speakers conclude at 11:35 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time, we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll conclude at 11:45 a.m. If you have questions for the speakers, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type those in, and then we'll get to those as time permits. So today we have with us Mr. Wes Whitman of Whitman Peterson and Ben Leahy of Cedar Capital Partners. These gentlemen have extensive experience and been very successful in their real estate careers. And today they're going to be talking about investing in the great outdoors, from AutoCamp to Sundance. So gentlemen, it's great to have you with us today. We look forward to learning about investing in the great outdoors. So take it away.
Thanks, Barrett. Appreciate the kind introductions. I know Ben and I are really happy to be here. Just wanted to first say that we really appreciate all that you and Troy and so many others at the Marriott School are doing to create opportunities for us to connect with one another, to learn more about what we're all doing in the industry and learn more about different markets that people are focused on, and really to increase the connection points between us as BYU alum, the companies that we work with, and also particularly the students at BYU. And we're excited for next week for the BYU Real Estate Conference, and hope that many who are joining this webinar will join us in person next Friday for that. So, and I think Ben and I both recognize everyone's time is really valuable and limited. So we're hopeful that we can make this worthwhile for you. By way of introduction, as Barrett mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders and co-managing partners of Whitman Peterson. We are an institutional real estate private equity fund sponsor that focuses really on a couple things, and I'll just be very brief here. We try to pick sectors that we believe have a super compelling demand story that will be enduring. We try to find the best platform companies we can that are very well positioned to execute at scale in those sectors, and then we form long-term relationships with those firms where we can sort of lock arms and go tackle the market opportunity together. We have the sort of a partners for life mentality where we don't try to be partners to lots of different people. We try to have a small handful of really scalable platform partners and try to earn the right to be their partners for life. And our approach is a little unique in that we tend to focus on asset level investing in the GP portion of the investments, and opportunistically take advantage of LP opportunities as well. Some of our partners include, and these are really our proprietary sort of long-term partners, Greystar in rental housing, Zebek in last mile industrial, Concord and Sage Hospitality in the lodging sector, Senior Lifestyle in the senior space, Cardinal in student housing, and then AutoCamp, who we'll mention today, in outdoor experiential travel. And we're closing on our fourth opportunistic fund, heaven willing, next week. We'll have our final close. And so that's a little bit about us. I'm going to talk about Ben in just a second and let him share his background, of course. But one of the newer themes in the market that we've been focused on at Whitman Peterson, and that Troy and Barrett thought might be of interest, is really this idea of outdoor, sort of unique travel experiences in the great outdoors. There's been a secular shift in demand toward experiential travel. You think of Airbnb and VRBO over the last 5 to 10 years. And really a desire to reconnect with the outdoors. Ideally, not sleeping on the ground or in a really old motel somewhere. Pre-pandemic, visitorship to national parks was booming. You don't have to look outside of Utah to know that. If you've ever stayed in the traffic line from St. George all the way to Springdale at Zion's, you know what that's like. And then, of course, since the pandemic, the idea of people getting out of their homes where we've all been sort of locked in for so long and getting out to the outdoors has been a big thing. Demand in experiential travel is happening across a much broader cross-section of America than has ever happened before, from an age perspective, race, socioeconomic status, where they're coming from geographically. There's a broad-based increase in wanting to have outdoor experiences. Just one stat that I'll share, and I can share more later, but there's 87, just using camping as an example, there's 87 million households in the US that are deemed as sort of camping households, at least one camping trip a year. 47 million of those went out during the pandemic, and a lot were landlocked. Of the 47 million that camped during the pandemic, 10 million people did it for their first time. And half of those people sought alternative sort of glamping or glamorous camping accommodations or something unique to do in the outdoors. We think the pandemic has just accelerated an already very significant secular trend in sort of how we think about travel. And we've been really focused on that at Whitman Peterson, backing a company called AutoCamp. And if we have time at the end after talking about Sundance, we'll talk about AutoCamp. But consistent with the strategy of sort of experiential properties, we were introduced by our partners, Joel Peterson and Clint Peterson, to the chance to meet Ben Leahy. And I just want to say, for Ben's and his company's acquisition of the Sundance Mountain Resort for Robert Redford, in light of Sundance being such a special place for so many of us, who spent time in Provo in our lives, we thought it might be interesting just to hear from Ben and get his take on the deal. To that end, let me introduce Ben, and then Ben, obviously will give you time to introduce yourself more fully, but Ben is not a BYU alum, although he is becoming a local very quickly with the number of times he's visiting Utah County. Ben attended Georgetown, and so grateful to have Ben involved. For those who are in the hospitality space, you probably have heard of Ben and know him. But Ben was formerly the global head of lodging at Goldman Sachs, and has advised people on more than $50 billion worth of hotel transactions. So Ben, everybody knows Ben, and Ben knows everybody. And not only, though, I would say is Ben's depth of experience impressive, but having worked through a lot of details together on Sundance and that transaction or that opportunity, I would say I know that Ben is a great partner. And he's a great human being. And so, Ben, we're really thrilled to have you here, and thought maybe if you could just first tell us a little bit about you personally, and then maybe a little bit about Cedar, and then we'll jump into Sundance.
Yeah, well, thanks for the kind words, Wes. And for those of you that don't know, Wes is a real Renaissance man, a talented songwriter and guitar player to boot. So on top of all the real estate day job responsibilities, he's got a plethora of other talents. So I, as Wes said, I went to Georgetown for undergrad, and actually then went into banking. And then, kind of in the last stop, as Wes mentioned, spent 11 years at Goldman, and a large portion of that was overseeing our global hotel lodging and leisure platform. And that was a great experience, seeing a lot of different stuff, kind of throughout the world. Truth be told, I actually took a year off during college and lived in Park City for a year. So became very fond of, obviously, Utah and the entire surrounding area. I would say, ironically, in living over by Park City and having a job that gave me a pass to ski Park City, unfortunately, I never went over to Sundance. And I think one of the unique things about Sundance is it's a little bit of a hidden gem, and people would talk about it. They'd reference it to me, but, I was in college, I was poor, and, leaned into that Park City pass and never had the chance to go over to Sundance really before about a year ago. And obviously it's a very special place. It's almost, kind of like day and night compared to many of the other resorts, I would say broadly within the US, or maybe even locally within Utah. But we're really excited about the opportunity to be the next stewards of Sundance, and obviously to have great partners like Wes and Whitman Peterson along for the ride.
Thanks, Ben. Can you talk a little bit about Cedar, just real quick, just give context to
Sure.
who you guys are and what you're focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say we're pretty much a sharpshooter. All that we do is invest in hotels. first within the, kind of the 5 major food groups of commercial real estate. So only hotels. And then I would say further to that, we only invest in full service hotels. So what we don't invest in are select service hotels, whether that would be a Courtyard by Marriott or Residence Inn. So, our hotels are, I would say, typically of some size and scale. They're usually in major markets or major resort markets. The firm was founded 17 years ago by a guy by the name of Ramsey Mancarius, a great guy that I got to know when I was at Goldman, and was very active actually in Europe. And when I joined, it was basically to replicate the European strategy here in North America. So we're off and running and trying to be thoughtful and opportunistic in this kind of post-COVID period that we're in.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Sundance, as you mentioned, it's a very special place. I think probably almost everybody on this call has had their own unique personal experience at Sundance. I think you're aware that I proposed to my wife there 22 years ago. I think there's probably several people on this call who probably did as well. But I'm guessing that like myself, most people didn't know Robert Redford was even considering, sort of transferring the stewardship of this great place to somebody else. Could you provide some context as to how sort of this opportunity came together and how you guys found out about it and were able to position yourselves to be the right group?
Sure. So there's a expression that Robert Redford likes to use, which is storytelling, and I'll give a little bit of storytelling here to lead into the setup, and I'll give the abridged version of the story. But it really starts back in 1970, and we have at Cedar we have several senior advisors, and 2 of them are gentlemen by the name of Lou Wolf and Flip Merritts. And Lou is an octogenarian. He was actually back in 1970s. He was working for 20th Century Fox. He had taken leadership of their real estate division. And one evening, someone at 20th Century said, "Listen, there's an actor who's down on the set, and they're trying to figure out how to work the gas pump." And Lou, I don't think had a clue how to work the gas pump, but he said, "Okay, yeah, sure, I'll run down there, I'll figure it out, and I'll help the guy out." And by happenstance, that was Robert Redford that Lou met back in the 1970s. So that was kind of the touch point number 1. Our senior advisor, Lou, met Redford, and then flash forward to the 1990s. Lou had partnered with Flip Merritts, another one of our senior advisors, and they actually formed a partnership called Merritts Wolf, very similar to Cedar insofar as investing in full service hotels. They built Rosewood Hotels. They owned half of Fairmont Hotels and Resorts. And they were asked to meet with Robert Redford about Sundance Mountain Resort. And as the story goes, both of them have totally different versions of that interaction. Lou and Flip walked away and said, "Redford isn't ready to sell." And Redford turned around and said, "These guys don't think that my resort is nice enough for them." So that was kind of and we all laugh about that meeting back in the 90s. And then flash forward to 2020, we started conversations with Redford prior to COVID happening and really the outbreak, and met with him, met with his family, met with his senior advisors. And I would say there was a long, I wouldn't call it trial period, courtship, whatever you like, but, Redford was very focused on finding the next steward for Sundance, given how special it is. And I think there was a fair amount of vetting that he did of ourselves, Cedar Capital. Flip, our senior advisor, is at a firm called Broadreach. So we partnered with Broadreach and Flip's colleagues on the transaction. And so he vetted us, and ultimately we were able to come to terms. Obviously, a little bit of a rocky ride with, the resort. I remember when we submitted what we thought was our final offer, it was the day before all the ski resorts in Utah shut down in March. So, there were some bumps along the road, but ultimately in December of 2020, we closed on the purchase of the resort.
Thanks, Ben. It's an unbelievable story, and I think it speaks to how relationships really matter in the real estate business, right? And trust, and having the long view. So I know there'll probably be some questions on that. One thing that I was impressed by, as we all looked at this deal, was sort of the diversity of different components that you needed to underwrite. Looking at the investment, could you help maybe just share, what are the components that you looked at in analyzing the Sundance investment, and just so people can understand sort of the various components of value?
Sure. So it's a great question because and it was really interesting, honestly, speaking with you, Wes, and a lot of other smart investors about the opportunity. If you were to try to boil it down very simply in what we own and what we don't own, at the core of it, what we own is 2,267 acres of fee simple land that the resort sits on top of. So that land is in the canyon when you drive up, basically on the left-hand side of the canyon. And actually, Robert Redford retained about 3,000 acres on the opposite side of the canyon, where he still maintains his home and his ranch. So at the core of it, I would say there's and very simply, there's real estate. What sits on top of it is a little bit more complex, and that's the resort business. The resort business itself probably does, well, this year it'll do a little north of 40 million in revenues, and that is stretched across about 12 different operating segments. And there are segments that you guys would, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, would appreciate, like mountain operations. And then when you drill into mountain operations, you have everything from mountain biking to skiing to zip lining to ski school, et cetera. Or if you go to food and beverage, we probably have six different food and beverage outlets. And that ranges from a simple food truck that I'm sure many of you guys have seen, that are the green food truck that's often at the base, to the fine dining of the tree room. So within each of these departments, these 12 different departments, there are a lot of component pieces and parts. If you were just to think about the large moving parts within the business, mountain operations is the most significant contributor of revenue. That's about 36% of revenue. Food and beverage is about 34% of overall revenue. And then when you dial into something like lodging, which we expect to expand, but the lodging component of the business is about 15%. Final thing I'll say about the business, which is wonderful, and I'm sure many of you have experienced, there's just the programming that's up there, that sometimes it may be a smaller item on a profit and loss statement, but it includes obviously summer theater, Bluebird Cafe, et cetera. So they're really, really great parts of the business, but there are a lot of them, and you got to figure out how to grow and nurture each of them to their fullest.
Thanks, Ben. That actually leads me to another question that, I think for those of us who have known Sundance for many years, one of the first questions was like, "Oh man, are these new guys going to mess this up? Are they going to do something that will take Sundance and turn it into something that it was never intended to be?" How do you? And I was, by the way, from the first moment that we started talking about it, I had great comfort that was not going to happen. But how do you think about sort of preserving the assets that Sundance, and the essence of Sundance, and the tradition and the history and all the things that everybody loves about it, and at the same time taking some of the things that may not, have contributed to guest satisfaction and improve those? So how do you sort of think about that balance of keeping it real but improving it?
Yeah, it's a great, and Wes, you've heard me say it before. And I say it often. It's more than quarterly that I say it to all of our partners. Like the biggest risk is we screw it up somehow. And I think fundamentally, in the hospitality business and in a place like Sundance, it comes down to people, and it's multifold. It's obviously, we talked about having good partners like yourself, Wes, It's having really good staff. I would say even, our investing team, our partners. We have, from my days at Goldman, I got to know a guy by the name of Bill Jensen, who was the COO of Vail. He was the CEO of Interwest, was most recently running Telluride, and Flip actually knows him personally. So I knew him professionally, Flip knew him personally, and we were able to convince him to join us in this investment. And I just say that because he has a wealth of knowledge around the ski industry. He's learned, and he will forget more than I will ever learn about the ski industry. So, adds a real compliment. But at the core of it, Wes, I think what's important is, recognizing what really drives the business. And at the core of our business is the local community. About 85% of our visits are driven by folks from Utah. And John Foster, another one of our partners, who, Wes, someone asked him, so how do you think that's going to be, call it 10 years down the line? And John's simple response was the same. And so we will never be, a Park City or Deer Valley that almost has the inverse where it's 85%, kind of fly to from out of state. I think that we will maintain a very strong connection to local communities. So making sure that you're aware of that, trying to figure out what you can do to bolster that. Redford has given some great advice around what opportunities we have, what we can do. And so there are certain aspects of Sundance. Flip and I, when we first got there, we were sitting at the base and people were talking to us about how the parking lot is, kind of inefficient, and sure it may be. And we saw a school bus, kind of rolling, a yellow school bus, and all the kids got out of the school bus and, their skis are falling off and poles are dragging. And we were like, we need to keep that connection and make sure that we don't lose it. So we're very focused on local community. We're very focused on, in the short term, on making improvements to the mountain that are, I would say, somewhat of deficiencies, whether it's, infrastructure or food and beverage that just didn't have the capacity that the mountain really should.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I hadn't remembered this because I hadn't skied there, in a while prior to talking about this opportunity. But I remember in college going up on a beautiful powder day and then being turned around because there was no parking, and sort of the peak day, no parking thing. And so if you think about what are the high impact changes that people can expect to see there, over the course of, the next year or so, just some of the main things.
Sure. So I would say, just big picture, our plan is to invest over $40 million in capital into the resort, during our ownership period, which we view as long-term. And initially, what we really focused on was, as I just kind of referenced, the infrastructure, and the infrastructure that we are improving upon in this first year includes new lifts. And so raised lift, and we had a open discussion. Flip and I kind of got there, we're like, oh, it's kind of charming. And, we started talking to management, started talking to more of the local community. It was old and slow. So we're putting in the first high-speed detachable quad that will be really kind of the workhorse lift for the mountain. That will replace raised. It will actually open up a really interesting portion of the mountain. Thanks for showing that. Portion of the mountain called Mandan Summit that you previously had to hike up to ski. So lifts, snowmaking is another thing that was a deficiency of the resort. And I think in many winters, once you get into the winter, i.e. you get into January and February, it's not as critical, but at the beginning of the season, it's much more critical. So having good snowmaking coverage is something that we're improving. We're doing that by building a reservoir. We've got over a 20 million gallon reservoir that is going to be up mid-mountain. That is going to be, it's actually a wonderfully crafted, really crafted by God. It's an indentation in the mountain, which we're basically lining and filling with water, but it You couldn't, there'd be a much bigger construction bill if it hadn't been set up that way up at Mid Mountain. So we're fortunate to have had that natural landscape to work with. And then beyond that, snowmaking, reservoir, the lifts, we've got more beginner, we're basically redoing the entire beginner area with magic carpet rides. And then finally, in this first year, we are expanding our F&B capacity. One of the things, while we have 6 different venues, and that includes stuff like Bear Claw up at the top, at the base, we felt that we needed a more family-friendly venue. So many of you know the Creekside building when you approach the resort that has the covered arcade that you walk through. That is completely under construction right now and is going to get the top floor is going to be repurposed into a modern barbecue restaurant. And so something that will be family friendly. It will be 3 meals a day. So again, families in the evening will have another option to eat at beyond the deli, beyond the foundry. And so we're really excited for that. That will be about 140 seats. So about 80 indoors and then 60 outdoors, because there were some funny stories along the way where we were there at Creekside. We said, geez, it's kind of closed in. And someone said, well, yeah, when Redford built it, he actually thought that there were going to be windows that would go up into the peak of the wall that faces out towards Timpanogos, like literally right at the
like this view here, right?
Exactly. We're like,
Yeah.
but you can't see it. So we're trying to open that up. And then obviously open up the outdoors because while it's a special place, there isn't adequate outdoor seating. So just allowing people to recreate outdoor, obviously really important in the context of COVID. So in the first year, there's going to be a lot of mountain infrastructure, F&B work, and then over time, there will be other projects that we look to take on more up on the mountain, quite candidly, as well as others.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I will mention parking is a piece of that too. I think our phase 1 is about 80 new parking spaces, followed up with some additional parking spaces, right? And then over time, adding some additional lodging in a very low density, very Sundance way, which I think will be appreciated.
That's right. And parking is a big, back to the kind of local community. Parking is important, and we're excited to kick that off this year with expanded parking, basically up near the Jake's lot, for folks that are familiar with that.
Perfect. Maybe I'll ask you one more question. I'll transition for just 5 minutes to some other outdoor experiential travel things. But Ben, thanks for all the insights. I guess just as you thought about capitalizing this deal, I think a lot of people look at 2 different funds that historically have sort of raised private equity. Is this sort of a quick flip, get in here, turn it around, juice the revenues and EBITDA, and then move on. I mean, I know that's not how you're thinking about it, but could you describe sort of how you approached the capitalization strategy here?
Sure. It was pretty simple. We bought it all cash up front. So that was I would say the simple strategy going in. A bit of that was, quite candidly dictated by COVID, and a lot of the hospitality lenders really kind of pulled in their horns, and they weren't that active. What we saw though over time was a real opportunity for kind of thoughtful expansion of the business, and we wanted to pair that with a conservative financing approach. So again, we invested, acquired the assets with all cash. We paid for all of the improvements to date with cash, and then ultimately, because this is really an operating business, we have different forms of debt financing that we can avail ourselves of. And that takes the shape and form of equipment financing against, mountain infrastructure like the lifts. There's also, kind of working capital lines, credit facilities, regular operating business approaches. And then ultimately, and to your point on the construction, we call it of an inn. It will be a 50 to 75 room hotel that we call the inn down at the base. That will likely be done with construction financing and likely a more traditional term out of a mortgage loan.
Yep. Perfect. Thanks. Yeah, I know for us as a manager of commingled funds, we looked at this sort of saying we've got to hold this at least 10 plus years on our side, recognizing you guys will want to hold even longer. And so this is not a quick I really like the word stewardship, because I think everyone on this call has just such tremendous respect for Mr. Redford and everything that he's done. I love that over the years, as he made movies and whatever portion of his income he dedicated to putting into the resort, he did. And I think anybody listening in can know that the group that is now feeling that responsibility for the stewardship going forward, I can tell you Ben and his team and everybody involved feels that same sort of stewardship for the land, if you will. So Ben, thank you so much for expanding on that. And if you're willing to hang tight with us for a few more minutes, we'll probably have some Q&A. And Barrett, I don't know if it would be useful or of interest for me to just explain a little bit more about what we're seeing in this experiential travel space, maybe for 5 more minutes. Would that be?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
We would love to hear about that. Thank you.
Okay, got it. So if you think about experiential travel in the outdoors, I mean, really in a lot of locations that are the iconic locations, you'll find really a few options. One is campgrounds, and those book 6 months in advance or a year. It's very difficult to get good campsites. And then otherwise, there might be 1 or 2 nice hotels, but really you're dealing with a lot of older product that doesn't really cater to a lot of what people are looking for in their travel experience today. And so you've seen a number of options that have come up, and I'll sort of just summarize here. If you look at these glamorous camping accommodations, this is from a company called, this top left is a company called Under Canvas, which is financed by KSL, is their equity partner. Many of you guys know KSL, they own Deer Valley. They're in this space. You have a lot of yurt product out there that people have been doing for years. You don't see as much of that today at scale. There's some super innovative stuff like, these globes that people are doing, which are kind of neat. Some impact on privacy, of course, in the globes. And then Getaway House, which was backed by Barry Sternlicht from Starwood Capital. They do these tiny homes where you're sort of off in really off in a remote location. What we have really liked in the space and what we've done, and I'll just hit on sort of what we've done, is we've partnered with a company called AutoCamp. And AutoCamp has a 10-year exclusivity with Airstream to essentially be the only people in the country who can create sort of Airstream hotels or Airstream properties. Excuse me. This is the inside of these Airstreams. They're all custom. Airstream has a production line specifically for AutoCamp and our program. But you've got these beautiful sort of marble bathrooms, hardwood floor finishes and really well-appointed interiors. But then you also have every person comes in. I'll show you the lobby here in a second. But when you get to your Airstream, you have your own, fire pit and seating area, and it really feels like a unique, very private place. On the other side of each Airstream, there are no windows. So the next Airstream over will have their own location just like this. You get your so this would be where this is the first prototype that was done in Russian River outside of San Francisco. Their Airstreams are a little closer together than they are in our normal projects. But you come into a clubhouse like this, which this is our Yosemite project, and you feel like you're checking into a really, really great experience, and then you go to your Airstream. What we've loved about this, I'll just show you a few more pictures. This is outside of New York City in the Catskills. This is our new project we're going to launch next year. This is our Cape Cod project that we just opened. This is the lobby there. In Joshua Tree National Park outside of LA, we opened this and we're opening in December. So you sort of get a sense of what we're doing in some of these locations. But what we've learned over the past 3 years in doing this is that if you can create, and whether it's AutoCamp or Under Canvas or any of these other great entrepreneurs out there who are doing things, that people really are craving a great, unique outdoor experience. They want to reconnect, as AutoCamp says, they want to reconnect with the outdoors and with each other. And it's really a trend that we don't see slowing down. And there's some really interesting good demand supply fundamentals because you have this huge demand. And a lot of these locations, it's really difficult to get anything done because the local municipalities don't want more hotel rooms or more traffic. And so it's a tricky business to navigate. It's not for the faint of heart, but if you can find a good strategy in that space, it can be a really interesting place to invest at really high returns. Let me stop there. I think we were supposed to end at 11:35, and hopefully we've done that now.
Yes, gentlemen, perfect. Thank you so much. Tremendous presentations. Let's have a question for Wes with regards to IRRs or yields on these types of properties. AutoCamp, a lot of our listeners probably have been familiar with this type and are wondering about yields.
Yeah. So we're developing to 10 to 11% unlevered yields on cost. And we also call that untrended. So that's without factoring in any inflationary growth in revenue or expenses. Just sort of like what if that asset were stabilized today in that market at the rates that we think are reasonable today, what NOI would that produce divided by our basis? So let's call it 10 to 11% yields on cost, which of course you can't find in very many places in real estate today. Obviously industrials in the 3s and 4s. Now, if you're acquiring new, call it, high 4s to mid 5s if you're building. But that's where it is. And sort of IRR expectations certainly are north of 20%. We are targeting to be in the mid 20s.
Okay,
On a
thank you.
levered IRR basis.
Thank you. Ben, share your thoughts about climate change and the impact that had. Was there any discussion at all with regards to snow and level of precipitation? I know Sundance has been one that seems to open a little bit later than some and close a little earlier than others. I know you mentioned the snowmaking machines, but had that come into the discussion, and was that factored into your discount rate or into your pricing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess first, we have some great partners actually in SE Group that are ski consultants. All they do is they look at different ski resorts. They do master planning, they do lift planning, and they are, if I'm a lodging nerd, these guys are the ski nerds. I mean, they know a lot about the ski industry, and climate change is something that we're all focused on. One of the things that was interesting as it relates to Sundance, and I remember having a conversation with Pete Williams from SE Group, who actually grew up in New Hampshire. I grew up in Maine. And we were just talking about the different areas of the U.S. and he kept on coming back to the Rocky Mountains and notably the Wasatch is where you want to be. So I think that the impact of climate change is going to be much greater actually on the East Coast, the West Coast. So the Lake Tahoe area actually has a lot of volatility. So if you look at snowfall over time, there are a lot of years where they get no snow and then others where they get so much snow it's actually difficult to get to the mountain. An interesting thing with Sundance is if we were to look back, over the last 5 years, average snowfall is about 220 inches. Last year, we had 156. So it was low. But we had record skier visits last year in the history of the resort. And that was with capacity constraints on how many guests we would allow on the mountain because of COVID. So as you get into the business, you realize you've got to get, kind of the macro right, i.e. be in a good location. And I won't spend too much time, but there will probably be some benefits that the Wasatch area gets from climate change, at least for a period of time. Who knows how long, but think about over the next 10 to 20 years. And then finally, what you find out when you're in a ski resort business is as important as how much snow you get in a year is when it falls. So last year, many people flash back to the ski season of 2021. We got a lot of good snowfall during the week. So we were set up well for the weekends. And obviously that's when people have the most time to get up to the resort. So they're excited to go ski some fresh snow. And so it's as important when it snows as to how much it snows many of the times.
Great, thank you. Wes, speak to the supply growth of outdoor places and the difficulty of entitling, and just speak to that whole general concept.
Sure. I mean, in most of these locations, the traffic has gotten so bad going into the national parks. If you're in a national park setting, that the locals are just saying, "Listen, we're done. We don't want any more construction. There's moratoriums on new hotel development." We are able to come in usually under an RV park designation, which sort of helps us have a unique angle getting into these markets. Some will allow for additional campgrounds, and sort of the idea of providing overnight accommodations in the form of campgrounds. There's sort of a general good to the public that people like about that, and municipalities like. But it is difficult. I mean, the land's getting obviously very expensive in all these areas. And so you're seeing people go a little bit further out, and you're seeing people being willing to drive a little further. So for example, at Yosemite, our project's 45 minutes outside of the park. But it's most everybody is 45 minutes outside of the park. You have the Ahwahnee Hotel in the park, but there's 140 keys there. So I think the supply side is constrained. There are people coming in, but we think the demand side is overshadowing the supply side in a big way right now.
Okay. Speak to seasonality in the investment for AutoCamp.
So what we do is we underwrite the seasonality that these markets experience. So we have all the lodging data for all these markets, and you can sort of see the seasonality trends. And we assume that our product will lag in the winter months, that we'll have sort of a buffer between what the hotels are doing versus what we can achieve. We're generally trying to target markets that are not highly seasonal, although we have Cape Cod, of course. But you'll see us throughout the Sun Belt doing a lot more in the Sun Belt. We're not in Yellowstone, as an example. We're not in Jackson. We may be eventually, and our Airstreams can handle it. We've actually equipped the Airstreams with greater HVAC systems, so that in the really hot climates like Joshua Tree, and in the really cold climates like Cape Cod, that we can sort of handle year-round business. But you just underwrite it. You expect it up front. You can see the visitation trends. You can see the hospitality trends, and you just try to be thoughtful on how you underwrite. And for us, having a product that can be an all-season product has been really important.
Great, thank you, Ben. We're getting a number of questions. People really curious about expansion and new lifts, and some of the mountain that has maybe tremendous ski opportunity, but it's not been exploited. Any secrets you can disclose?
Sure, I'll disclose some secrets. So I think specifically right now, the resort has about 450 skiable acres. And the good news, bad news is the lift replacement of rays won't open up that much more incremental skiable terrain. But over time, we think that we will be able to take that 450 skiable acres to over 800 skiable acres. So almost a double of the skiable terrain. And since most all of you know Sundance, if you were looking up at the mountain to the far east area, so if you're staring at the mountain, really kind of the left side, those ridge lines that come down off of the peak, kind of riding away from Bear Claw, et cetera. But it's really the expansion area and opportunity is at the mid-mountain portion. So think of when you get up to the top of Jake's and back there, as well as to the left. There are some wonderful open bowls that we have plans to open up over time. So we're really excited. It's a bit of a marathon, not a sprint. So that acreage will be opened up most likely in the next kind of 2 to 3 years, and I think it will really change the skier experience once you're there. We'll have more amenities up there, probably have another mid-mountain lodge in addition to Bear Claw. So I think people will just ski the mountain differently. And obviously the first taste, as I mentioned, is the opening of the Mandan Summit terrain, which is a nice aspect because it actually provides some advanced tree skiing on the front side of the mountain, which obviously was there before, but you had to hike to get there. So we're excited to share that with everyone this year.
Great. Thank you so much. That's very exciting. Gentlemen, we have a number of students on the call today. And would each of you just take just a minute, starting Wes with you, if you could, share just a thought or two with the students. If there's any particular area that you see opportunity as they get ready to graduate and go into the workforce, or anything that you would recommend that they tune up on as they do so.
Sure. Well, maybe just two very quick things. One, I think learn from Ben and his team that relationships matter. That it's never too early to start building relationships with people, seeking great advice, always being the kind of person who you're hoping your partners will be. I think that's number one. And number two, I would say also is pick the people. That if I had a choice between working for it was a brand name, but not with people that I was going to enjoy being around and respect. Hopefully those aren't, hopefully you can find both. But I just think when I joined, and Chris Woolley may be on the call here, when he and I joined Graystar in 2005 out of business school, no one had heard of them. No one knew what they were doing. Everyone wondered why we weren't going to Tishman or Heinz or some other big, global place. But it really came down to the people. We just really felt like, gosh, I just want to be around these folks and be partners with them. And so I think, A, start meeting a lot of people and being interested in their lives and their careers, and B, really seek out, to be with great people, partner with great people, work for great people, work with great people. Those would be my two things, Troy, or Barrett.
Thank you, Wes. Ben.
That's a tough act to follow. I would echo a lot what Wes said. The other thing which actually Chris Nassetta, who's CEO of Hilton, would say is follow your passion. If you're passionate about something, you'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. You'll wake up in the morning thinking about it, and you'll probably go to bed thinking about it. And you need to have balance in your life, and I think we all strive to do that. But if you're passionate about something, follow the passion. And then I think, to Wes's point, speak to as many people in that area, wherever it may be, if it's commercial real estate, if it's hospitality, speak to as many people as you can to try to figure out the path to follow to really exploit that passion, because it really, in my mind, at the end of the day, it leads to happiness. It will lead to greater success, kind of financially, et cetera. But follow your passion.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to share with us. And for everyone on the call today, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again on November 4th, where we'll discuss the Wasatch Front housing market. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Wes.